A brick row house stands narrow and dark against a February sky over Providence. Sleet slants across 6 olive-green doors. On the roof, high above the third-story cornice, a small square of gray wood has been nailed shut for 22 years. Down at the curb, a borrowed Corolla pulls up. A young woman steps out. Her coat is too big. Her hands still smell of hospital bleach. In her fingers, 2 keys, one brass, one silver. Look closer. On the top step, an old man sits with a green thermos between his knees, waiting. He has been waiting since 6:15 that morning. Behind him inside the front hall, water is running down a wall. Behind that, in a wooden box no one has opened, 7 letters lie sealed. Behind that, somewhere in a lawyer's office across the river, a woman is signing a document that does not belong to her. The wind lifts the boarded square on the roof. Once, twice. And then the old man looks up. The sleet was still on her coat when the lawyer opened the folder. Nettie stood in the hallway of Ambrose Faraday's office on Westminster Street. Her hand still carried the bleach smell from the hospital laundry the night before. She was 20 years old. She had slept 4 hours in the last 3 nights. And in 2 hours, she would understand something her grandmother had spent 24 years preparing her to understand. That the oldest, leakiest, worst of the 3 buildings her grandmother left behind was the largest gift she had ever given anyone. And that on the roof of that building there was a small square of gray wood boarded shut for 22 years, waiting for exactly 1 pair of hands to open it. She did not know any of that yet. She only knew her sisters were counting the doors. Cressida sat straight in the chair to the right of the conference table. Her wedding ring was gone, but the pale line where it had lived was still there, faint against the winter of her hand. 33, divorced 11 weeks, already good at pretending the ring had been off longer than that. Bettina sat to her left with her legal pad flat on her thigh pin uncapped, doing the small polite work of a person who did not want to be counted among the counters. 28, manager of a hair salon on Federal Hill. The one who had cried into a stranger's scarf at their grandmother's memorial and then apologized for it in the parking lot. Nettie sat across from both of them. She wore her grandmother's black wool coat. The shoulders were too wide. There was still a peppermint fused to its paper wrapper in the left pocket. She had not moved the peppermint. It felt like moving a small piece of aloe would be the kind of thing you had to earn permission to do. Faraday cleared his throat. He was narrow silver at the temples and had the voice of a man who read insurance policies for pleasure. His office smelled of old coffee lemon oil and the faint sourness of paper printed too long ago to still smell fresh. On the table sat a glass bowl of butterscotch candies that no one had touched. To my granddaughters, Cressida Fairchild and Bettina Fairchild. Jointly he read, I leave the properties known as Pemberton Row and Fenway Court, including all land structures, leases, and related contents. Cressida did not smile. She had trained herself not to. Bettina wrote something on the legal pad and then crossed it out. And to my granddaughter Nettie Fairchild, I leave the property at 1849 Larkin Row, subject to the existing tenancy of Warren Pretty. Nettie looked down at her lap, because her hands were shaking and she did not want anyone to see. Because she had watched those cursive letters at the bottom of the will, Eloan Fairchild, shaky but unmistakable, and she had recognized every failed loop of it. She had trimmed the fingernails that made those loops. She had held those fingers between her own at 3 in the morning when they were cold. And now those loops were telling her she had been given the smallest of 3 buildings and one 71-year-old man who came with it like a piece of furniture no one thought to move. For one humiliating second, she wondered if her grandmother had died angry with her. Then she wondered if she had died disappointed. Then she thought of the peppermint in the pocket and remembered that Eloan had bought a whole bag of them the week she went into hospice, said she wanted them for guests and then eaten everyone herself. Faraday kept reading. A small savings account, a promise to the animal shelter on Cranston Street, a plot next to Nettie's grandfather at Swan Point, a dining table for Cressida that had been in the house since 1978, a set of pearl earrings for Bettina that Eloan had worn to her own wedding. To Nettie, the will gave the sewing box all family photographs, not otherwise designated, and every recipe card in the tin on top of the refrigerator. Cressida almost said something. Faraday looked over his glasses. Any questions? Cressida had 5. She wanted to know about tax valuations. She wanted to know about lease transfer schedules. She wanted to know when she could inspect the mechanical rooms at Pemberton and Fenway. She wanted to know whether the estate would cover replacement of a refrigerator in a vacant unit. She wanted to know whether the tenant on Larkin Row could be legally repositioned. Nettie's head came up on the last one. Reposition, she said, and the word came out flatter than she meant it. Cressida smiled the way a person smiles when they have already decided not to be embarrassed by their own vocabulary. Relocated. Bought out. Encouraged to seek a more suitable arrangement. Bettina did not look up from the legal pad. Faraday folded his hands. Mr. Pretty holds a written lease. His terms transfer with the property. He has been notified by certified letter that ownership will pass through the estate. Notified how? By certified letter. So he knows. He should. Bettina made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. Cressida turned her head half an inch. That was as close as Cressida ever came to a warning. Faraday slid 3 envelopes across the polished wood. 2 keys in one. Copies of Warren Pretty's lease in another. A single sheet of insurance information in the third. Nettie's fingers were still cold. She had to concentrate to make them close around the envelope. Cressida watched her do it. That house is going to eat everything you have, Cressida said quietly. Frankly, it might be kinder if we, Cressida, said Bettina. I am being kind. I am being practical. I am being aligned with what our grandmother would want if she had been thinking clearly at the end. Nettie looked up. She did not raise her voice. She did not know how to raise her voice. She had spent 15 months learning to speak quietly enough that her grandmother could sleep. She had spent even longer than that learning to speak quietly enough that her sisters did not correct her. She was thinking clearly, Nettie said, which was the first sentence of the rest of her life, though she did not know it yet. Cressida opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Fine. Faraday coughed politely into his fist. Outside on Westminster Street, the sleet had turned to a wet gray rain, the kind that made the granite of downtown Providence look like it was crying without effort. Nettie walked past the courthouse, past the coffee shop where her grandmother used to buy the almond croissants that were too expensive for a widow on a fixed income and worth every dollar, because Eloan said some things were the small revenge you took against death by choosing them anyway. The borrowed car was a 2004 Corolla that belonged to her roommate Tashawn. It smelled like eucalyptus lozenges in the pine tree air freshener. Tashawn changed every Thursday. Nettie sat in the driver's seat for a full minute before turning the key. She looked at the envelope on the passenger seat. 2 keys, 1 brass and 1 silver. This is what she left me. Then this is what she trusted me with. The 2 sentences did not feel like the same sentence. Larkin Row was 14 blocks northwest of downtown. The car climbed College Hill, dropped down toward the water, and then took the narrow curve past the old textile mill where Eloan's mother had worked at a loom for 9 years in the 1940s. The row of houses came into view like a set of tall red teeth. 6 of them. Brick fronts, olive green doors, tall narrow windows crowded together like sisters at a bus stop. 6 houses, and on top of each one, up above the 3rd-story cornice, a small railed platform of gray wood boxed in by a fence of iron scrollwork. The Widow's Walk. Providence had been a shipping city once. The women who lived in these houses had climbed those platforms in the 1890s to watch the mouth of the Providence River for their husbands' sails to come back around Prudence Island. 5 of the 6 Widows' Walks on Larkin Row had been rebuilt at least once. Their railings were newer. Their planks were tighter. Only the walk on top of 1849 still had the original wrought iron scrollwork, blackened by 136 winters, and only the walk on top of 1849 had been boarded shut. Someone had covered the trap door with a sheet of plywood in the fall of 2003 and nailed it down as if to say not yet. Nettie did not know that yet either. She saw a boarded-up square. She thought, one more thing that needs fixing. She parked at the curb. The rain was thinning into a mist that made every surface look like it had just been kissed. On the top step of 1849, Warren Pretty sat with a green thermos between his knees and a dented metal toolbox on his left. I was small. He was gray. His beard was cut close and neat, the kind of neat that told you a man still cared how he presented himself when nobody was going to see him. He wore a brown work jacket that had been washed enough times to look kind. His eyes were on her before she reached the bottom step. "You Eloan's granddaughter." It was not a question. "Nettie, I know which one." She stopped at the bottom step. Something about the way he said it made her feel small and at the same time exact. Like she had walked into a room where the light was on and someone had been waiting. He tipped his head toward the door. "Water's been running behind the kitchen wall since 6:15 this morning. You've been sitting out here since 6:15. Containing it since 6:15. Watching is different." The rain had softened his jacket to the color of wet bark. Nettie set the envelope on the top step and knelt and worked the brass key into the lock. It caught. She lifted it out and tried the silver one. Warren did not correct her. He watched her fingers lift the knob. She lifted the knob. The door groaned open with a wet wooden note that seemed to come from lower down in the frame than she expected. The front hall smelled like coffee, old varnish, and something faintly damp enough to have a shape. Warren picked up the toolbox by the handle and stepped aside so she could go in first. To the right through an open doorway was Warren's front room. It was crowded but arranged. Two upholstered chairs faced a workbench. A tall antique radio with its wooden back panel removed sat against one wall, its brass tubes glowing dimly in the gray light. Narrow shelves ran up the wall behind the bench filled with labeled jars of screws, hinges, wooden dowels, and tiny brass nails. A dining chair had been clamped upside down on the bench, one leg wet with fresh glue. The wood smell was clean and warm and old. Straight ahead, a dark hallway led toward the back of the house. The water noise came from there, a thin, patient thread of it, the kind of sound that meant something small had been happening for hours, and nobody had told anyone. Nettie thought of her grandmother in the hospice bed, the small, patient sound of Eloan's breathing at 3 a.m., the way you did not notice a sound like that until you did. And then it was the only sound in the world. Warren was already down the hall. "Basement's through there," he called over his shoulder. "Valve under the sink didn't stop it. Means it's further back. Main shutoff's downstairs, behind the furnace." He said it as if he were describing a route he had walked 20,000 times, because he had. Nettie followed him through the kitchen. Somebody had painted the cabinets a soft yellow so long ago that the paint had aged into cream. A thin, dark line of water was creeping down the plaster behind the sink, sliding along the baseboard, spreading in a slow half-moon on the linoleum floor. Warren had already arranged 3 folded towels in a shallow perimeter and slid a yellow roasting pan under the worst of the drip. "How long you been sitting out there waiting to see if I could find the shutoff?" "About long enough to know." He did not smile. He did not smile either. The basement door was in the hallway. A brass padlock hung from a metal hasp. Nettie tried the brass keys. Neither fit. Warren tipped his head toward the small silver key still in her hand. "The little one. The silver one opens the front door." "Opens the front door and the padlock. That doesn't seem very safe. Seems like Eloan." The silver key opened it. Behind the door, steep wooden stairs went down into the dark. Nettie found the switch. A bare bulb came on below and lit the brick walls, the copper pipes, the old iron furnace that looked large enough to have a personality. Warren took the rail first. Halfway down without turning, he asked whether her shoes were any good. Waterproof. That wasn't the question. Her heel slid on the next step. She caught the rail. She did not tell him he had been right about the question. The basement floor was uneven concrete. There were shelves full of paint cans, glass jars, folded tarps, and rectangles of scrap wood. A washing machine stood in the corner beside a utility sink. Above them, the pipes ticked. Warren pointed toward the wall behind the furnace. Red wheel, between the wall and the iron main. Clockwise. Slow. Nettie crouched. The valve was iron-ringed with cobwebs, and the wheel was the size of her palm. She wrapped her fingers around it. He watched her wrist. Other way. I haven't moved it yet. You were about to. Wrist told me. She let out a small breath. She turned it clockwise slowly. The wheel did not move. Warren took a small can of oil down from a shelf, sprayed the stem, stepped back. Let it sit. Longer if you stare at it. Upstairs, he set 2 mugs on the counter without asking. He poured coffee from a battered enamel pot that Nettie later learned had traveled to Larkin Row from his mother's kitchen in South Kingstown in 1976. The coffee was strong enough to taste faintly burnt. There was a thumbprint on the rim of her mug. She drank it anyway. Give it 8 minutes, he told her when she started to ask about the valve. He pulled open the cabinet under the sink. The wood inside was dark. The bottom panel had swollen at one edge into a soft, felt-like lip. He pressed one thumb against it. The wood gave. How bad? Bad enough that the cabinet lost. Was it always this bad? No. He straightened and looked at the wall. His right hand hung at his side. She noticed then that his fingers had a small, steady tremor, not large, not loud, the kind of tremor a person had learned to work around. It disappeared when he set his palm flat against the plaster. When was the last time it was fixed? 2019. Wouldn't hold now. Grandma knew. Elowen knew everything about this house. Then why? Because she was tired. And people who are tired put things off. And people who put things off run out of time before they thought they would. And then the people they left behind end up in a basement with a stranger who used to fix their sinks. He looked at her, not unkindly, just steadily. Nettie set the mug down. I'm not a stranger, I know. That was the first time all afternoon that either of them told the truth without meaning to. The valve took 19 minutes to move. When it did, it went in a single sudden turn that sent her knuckles into the brick. She swore once very quietly under her breath. Good, said Warren. Means you didn't break anything important. Water stopped inside the kitchen wall. There was one more slow drip and then nothing. Nettie stood up. Her knees ached. Her hands were dusty. Warren was already climbing the stairs, his right hand tight on the rail. Behind the furnace on a low workbench in the corner of the basement sat a wooden apple crate. Its slats were dark with the sort of oil that came off a person's hands over years. Inside it, standing upright, the way library books stood on their spines, were 19 small black leather notebooks. Each one had a strip of masking tape on the cover. Each strip had a date and an address in careful square handwriting. 1849, Larkin Row, 2001-2004. 1849, Larkin, 2005-2007. Pemberton Row, 2008. Fenway Court, 2009. Pemberton Row, 2010, and on and on. Nettie stopped at the base of the stairs. She did not touch them yet. She counted the spines instead, which meant something. She was not sure what yet. Only that a person did not keep 19 of anything unless they had decided at some point that the thing mattered enough to keep counting. Warren, she called up the stairs. What are these? There was a pause. Then his voice came down dry, and even the voice of a man who had been asked the question before and had not enjoyed answering it the first time. Those are the records. Of what? Of the houses. All 3 of them. All 3. She reached down and picked up the top notebook. It was the newest. The tape on its cover marked Pemberton Row 2023. She opened it near the front. In Warren's small square handwriting, the first entry read, February 4th, Mrs. Alvarez, 3B. Reports knocking sound in wall behind bed at approximately 5 a.m. Not pipes. Delivery door at rear alley. Closer failing. Adjusted spring tension replaced door sweep. She sleeps now. Told her not to tip me. She flipped forward. March 12, Walter Ruiz, 2C, radiator valve painted shut by prior contractor. Bought 6 replacement vents, use 5. 6th in blue box on workbench, Larkin Row top drawer. She kept turning. There were pages about basement drains, about which apartment doors stuck when the humidity rose above 60%, about which tenant had lost a husband in what month of what year and would want a small check-in call around the anniversary because she would not ask for one. There were pencil sketches of pipe runs, phone numbers with tiny stars next to them, and a note that read, "Good but talks too much." There were 4 pages near the back of nothing but grocery lists. Nettie realized she was looking at Warren's shopping runs for his wife Odessa in the last months of her life. Milk, ginger ale, the pears she liked, the kind of tissues that did not smell like a hospital. She closed that page carefully. She climbed the stairs, holding the notebook against her chest. Warren was in the kitchen sitting on a stool. His right hand was flat on the counter. He was not looking at her. "Set it back," he told her without turning. "Please." His voice was steady. His hand was steady because he was making it be. But the muscle at the side of his jaw was moving, which was, Nettie would learn, the only place on Warren Pretty where fear ever showed up. "How many of these are there?" 19. "For how many years?" 22. "Started when Elowen bought Pemberton." "Why?" He turned his head then. His eyes were the color of wet slate. She had not gotten close enough before to notice. "Because your grandmother could not always remember what she owned. And because I could." Nettie did not answer. She did not know how to answer. She sat down on the second stool. She set the notebook flat on the counter between them. She looked at the tape on the cover. Pemberton Row 2023, the most recent one. The one that ended, she saw when she flipped to the last written page on the 12th of November, which was the day her grandmother had entered hospice. Warren had not written a single entry after that day. He stopped when she stopped. He waited. "Whose hands is this house in?" Warren stood. He crossed the room to the front room and came back with something in his palm. He set it down beside the notebook. It was a photograph. It had once been in a frame, but the frame was gone, and the paper had softened at the corners the way paper did when it had been carried in a jacket pocket for a long time. The picture showed 2 people standing on the sidewalk in front of Pemberton Row. Elowen was on the left, laughing, her head tipped back, one hand up to her mouth like she was trying to catch the laugh before it got away. Maybe in her mid-50s. Her hair was still dark. Her cardigan was the cardigan Nettie had folded in the hospital 108 nights ago. On the right was Warren, younger, standing straight, holding of all things a green wooden chair with a loose arm. His face was turned toward Elowen. He was not laughing, but the corner of his mouth was moving. On the back of the photograph, in blue ink that Nettie recognized before her mind put the words together, someone had written, "The only one who knows how this house breathes." Nettie could not swallow for a moment, because it was her grandmother's writing, because it was her grandmother saying out loud on paper something she had never once said in front of Cressida or Bettina or Nettie herself. Ella Owen had not been the kind of woman who told people how she felt about them. She had been the kind of woman who noticed when your shoes were wet and put them by the radiator. And now here on the back of a photograph in her own hand, in ink that had not been dry more than a few years, was the sentence that made everything Nettie had heard about this house feel like a lie. "Cressida said you took $47, she told him, and did not look up. Warren looked down at the photograph. He picked it up. He turned it over so the writing faced away. He set it back on the counter. "She said I padded the invoice for a boiler pump at Pemberton," he told her. "October, 4 months before your grandmother went into hospice. She said I overcharged $47. She was wrong. The supplier gave me a credit because I bought the same pump twice that year, and the first one was defective. I passed the credit through. Elowen saw the paperwork." Elowen laughed. "Elowen told your sister to apologize." "Did she?" "No." "Cressida." "Correct." "Then why did you stop?" He did not answer right away. He picked up the mug he had poured for himself, drank the last cold inch of it, and set the mug back down with the kind of precision a person uses when they do not entirely trust their hand. Because when a woman looks you in the face after 22 years and decides you are the kind of man who would steal from her mother, it is not the $47 that is the problem. He looked at her. "It's the 22 years." Nettie had nothing to say to that. She would think later that night that she had never in her life been sitting inside a sentence that heavy. She had held her grandmother through her last coughing fit. She had washed a nightgown in the sink of a hospice bathroom because Eloan had said she wanted her own smell around her at the end. Those had been heavier things, and yet they had not been sentences. They had been actions. This sentence sat on the kitchen counter of Larkin Row between two coffee mugs and one photograph and one leather notebook, and it did not move. Warren picked up his toolbox. He was going to leave the room. She could tell by the shift of his shoulder. Warren. He paused. Did she know? My grandmother. About the $47. About Cressida telling you to leave. He set the toolbox down again. She knew. She came here in October, before hospice. Climbed those front steps by herself. Wouldn't let me call anyone. Wanted me to come back. Said she would fix it with Cressida. I told her no. Not because of Cressida. Because of me. Because I couldn't be the man who worked for someone whose family thought that of him. She sat in that chair right there, in the front room. She said I was making her tired. I said she'd made herself tired. She laughed. And then she said, and I remember this exact, she said, Warren, if you won't take the buildings back, then take her back. Take who back, I asked. And she said, my Nettie. Nettie could hear the kitchen clock. It ticked the way old clocks tick unevenly, as if it was working a little too hard. She said my name. She said your name. Take her back to where? He looked at her for a long moment, then very quietly told her Eloan had said only take her back to the house. That was all. She hadn't said which house. He picked up the toolbox again. This time he did leave the room. Nettie sat on the stool at the kitchen counter for a long time after he went. She listened to the pipes. She listened to the clock. She listened to a car going by outside on Larkin Row with its wipers on. She looked at the photograph. She looked at the notebook. She thought about the way people wrote on the back of pictures when they wanted a sentence to survive them. Take her back. Nettie did not know yet which her Eloan had meant. She did not know Eloan had meant the house. She did not know that the house in Eloan's private grammar had always been feminine. She did not know that in a wooden box under a board of plywood on the widow's walk, 3 floors above her head, there were 7 letters her grandmother had written to her in the last 8 months of her life. Or that one of them, the 5th one, began, My Nettie. If you are reading this, then the house has already given you its first lesson, which is that it is not a house, it is a woman. And she has been waiting for you the way I waited for you. Nettie did not know any of that. She only knew in that moment, sitting at the kitchen counter of 1849 Larkin Row, while a 71-year-old man moved around in the front room and did not want to be looked at, that she had been given a piece of her grandmother that her sisters could not touch, and that she did not know yet whether that piece was a punishment or a promise, or worst of all, an assignment. She stood. She put the notebook back in the crate in the basement. She put the photograph in the inside pocket of her coat next to the peppermint. She left the house at 4:15 p.m. Warren did not come out to say goodbye. She did not expect him to. On the front steps she stopped, looked up along the tall front of the row house at the small square of plywood nailed shut over the widow's walk, and thought, I will come back tomorrow. Then she got into Tashawn's Corolla and drove back across the river. Tashawn was in the kitchen when Nettie came in. Lavender scrubs and satin sleep bonnet at the same time, which was a thing Tashawn did on the days when she had worked a double at Rhode Island Hospital and was operating on approximately no sleep and pure willpower. She was eating breakfast cereal out of a mixing bowl. She had labeled the milk in the refrigerator again. The label read, Mine. Date open 2/6. This means you, Nettie. You look like a house fell on you. Only the water bill. How bad? Nettie hung her coat on the hook by the door. She sat down at the little card table that served as their kitchen table. She rubbed her hands. Her fingers were still numb from the basement. She told Tashawn about the tenant, about the rent. $575, Tashawn repeated. A month for a whole floor of a Providence row house. She set down her spoon. She looked at Nettie for a long moment. She was not judging. Tashawn had never in her life judged Nettie for anything. Tashawn had picked Nettie up at the emergency room at 11:15 p.m. on a Tuesday in the second week of hospice, when Nettie had passed out from low blood sugar in the visitor's bathroom and had said nothing about it in the car except, "Would you like Wendy's?" which was the friendship Nettie had. "You cannot afford this house, girl. I know. You cannot afford the roof of that house. I know you cannot afford to keep somebody in that house at $575 a month while a roof rots over their head. I know, do you know?" The way Nettie held the edge of the table with both hands answered for her. Tashawn tipped her cereal bowl and let the last of the milk run into the corner. She got up, she rinsed the bowl, she stood at the sink with her back to Nettie for a moment. Then she told her without turning that rent was going up in April. 180, she could not do less. Building insurance had gone up. Water had gone up. Everything had gone up except her desire to work. She had not wanted to tell Nettie today. "Yeah. Yeah, what? Yeah, I heard you. You. Not yeah, it's fine. I just heard you." Tashawn turned around. Her face was tired and kind. She told Nettie to sell the house. Nettie did not answer. She pulled her phone out. She opened her banking app. The balance stared up at her from the little screen. $523.11. Every dollar she had in the world. 2 weeks of hospital laundry shifts. 3 months of Eloan's medication copays that Nettie had covered out of pocket because Eloan had refused to switch to the generic on the little blue pill because she said it made her feel like a project. 523. For a roof estimate that would, she suspected, begin with the digit 2 and end in 3 zeros. She locked the phone. She looked up. "I'll think about it," which was a lie because she was already thinking about it, because she had been thinking about it since Warren said the words 22 years in the kitchen at Larkin Row, because a person did not spend 15 months at their grandmother's bedside and then sell the last thing that grandmother ever tried to hand them. Not on the first day, not on any day. Not if the person had been raised by a woman who had once sat at the kitchen table at Larkin Row when Nettie was 7 years old and had brought home a report card with a C in math. "We do not throw a thing away because it is difficult. We sit down with it until it is not." Nettie thought about that sentence in bed that night. Tashawn's condo was small. Nettie's room was a twin bed, a dresser with one drawer that stuck, and 3 unopened respiratory therapy textbooks on top of the dresser. She had bought them in June before her grandmother's diagnosis. She had never opened them. She lay in the dark and listened to Tashawn's television murmuring through the wall. She looked up at the ceiling. She thought about Warren's hand, about the little tremor she had seen when he had first crouched under the sink, about how he had put his palm flat against the wall to steady it. She thought about the way he had said the word repositioned and the way Cressida had said the word repositioned, and how the same word had meant 2 different things depending on whose life it was going to enter. She thought about the ink on the back of the photograph. The only one who knows how this house breathes. Nettie sat up in bed. She got up. She went to her coat still hanging on the hook by the door. She reached into the inside pocket. She took out the photograph. In the light of the street lamp coming through the little window over the sink, she looked at Eloan's face tipped back mid-laugh, and Warren's face turned toward her, the small smile trapped at the corner of his mouth. She turned the photograph over. She read the sentence again. And then, because she had been raised by a woman who taught her that when something felt strange, you did not pretend. It was not strange, you sat down with it until it was not. Nettie went back to bed. She put the photograph on the pillow beside her head. She closed her eyes, and she thought very simply and very clearly before sleep finally took her at 4:10 in the morning. "I am not selling that house tomorrow." She did not yet know that 4 blocks northwest in the front room of 1849, Larkin Row Warren Pretty had also not slept. He had sat in the chair by the workbench with the enamel coffee pot going cold on the counter. He had opened the drawer under the workbench. He had taken out a small brass key on a paper tag and set it on the wood in front of him. And he had looked at it for a long time. He had thought about a woman he had loved for 41 years and a woman he had worked for 22. He had thought about a girl he had met that afternoon whose hands smelled like industrial bleach and who did not know yet what her grandmother had left her. And he had thought in the low, patient way of a man who had lived long enough to know that the shape of a life sometimes waits inside a piece of wood for years without moving well. Well, the key was still there when the sun came up over Providence. The rain had stopped. Somewhere on the roof of 1849, Larkin Row wind moved against a small square of plywood that had been nailed shut in the fall of 2003. Nothing opened yet, but something very quietly in the way old houses do when they have been waiting a long time for the right pair of feet on the stairs began to lean forward. She went back the next morning, not because she had decided anything, because she had a bag of clothes in the Corolla and a coffee she had forgotten to drink, and the cheap gray light of a February morning in Providence sitting flat on her shoulders like a coat one size too small. Because Tashawn had told her at 7 a.m. over the kitchen sink that the condo would need her out by the last week of March. Because there was nowhere else. Because in her wallet, there were now $418.11. Because a person did not, in Nettie's private grammar drive, across a bridge and back 3 times in 24 hours without deciding something at the end of it. Warren was on the front step again. Same green thermos, same brown work jacket. This time no water was running behind the wall. She parked. She got out. She stood on the sidewalk with her hand on the roof of the Corolla and looked up at 1849 Larkin Row. The row was 6 houses long. 5 of them had lights on. The 6th was hers. In the tall window on the 2nd floor, a lace curtain moved in a way that told her the radiator was on. Warren had turned the radiator on for her. He had not been asked to do that. Something in her chest did a small, quiet thing. She did not have a word for it yet. He watched her cross the sidewalk, noted the bag over her shoulder, asked which room. 2nd floor front. That's the coldest one. I know. He nodded once, tipped the thermos. He did not smile. But when she walked up the step past him, he stood, picked up the 2nd bag from the sidewalk without being asked, and carried it up the stairs for her. His right hand shook a little. His left hand did the work. The 2nd floor front had been her grandmother's when Elowen still came to Larkin Row in the season she felt strong enough to sleep in a house that was not her apartment. It had a bed with a brass frame, a small oak dresser with a marble top, a window that looked down onto the street, and Nettie discovered as she set her bag on the floor and turned in a slow circle, a small water stain on the ceiling in the corner nearest the fireplace. A pale brown ring, wide as a dinner plate. Warren was already in the doorway. He saw her looking at the stain and told her it would go someday. When? When the roof lets go. How soon? Sooner than I would like. Which was the closest Warren had come so far to admitting he wanted anything. Nettie went back downstairs. He showed her the wall that afternoon. Not with a lesson. Warren did not teach with lessons. He taught with the kind of standing back that a mother bird does when the fledgling is on the edge of the nest and the mother is not going to catch it, and both of them know it. He walked her along the west wall of the front room and stopped at a spot near the mantel. He put his knuckles against the plaster. He rapped once. The sound was flat and full. He moved his knuckles 4 inches to the left and rapped again. The sound was hollow. Hear that? That one's hollow. That's what it sounds like. It's hollow. No. Nettie waited. Warren rapped a 3rd time. He told her it sounded hollow but wasn't. It was thinner. The lath behind it was spaced wider. Different problem. Fix the 2nd one, you break the wall. Ignore the 1st one, you get mold. The only way you got to know the difference was to tap every square foot of this house for about 10 years. Or he added, looking at her, you could listen to a person who had already done it. She did not answer. She reached up, laid her own knuckles against the plaster. She rapped, because her first instinct had been to say, I understand. Because she had almost said it. Because she had spent 15 months in a hospice room learning to say I understand to a woman who was asking her over and over without asking, please pretend you do. And now in the front room of 1849 Larkin Row with a man whose hand still shook when he put down a cup. Nettie realized how tired she was of pretending she understood things. So she rapped. Warren watched her wrist, told her to slow down. She slowed. She rapped again. She moved 4 inches. She rapped again. She did not say she heard it, but her mouth moved a little at the corner, which was more than Warren usually got out of anyone. He turned away, went to the workbench, and pretended to sort a jar of screws so that neither of them had to acknowledge the small, quiet thing that had just happened in that room. Estelle Pruitt came at 3:40 that afternoon. Nettie did not know it was Estelle. She only knew there was a soft knock at the front door, more rhythm than sound, 3 short taps and a pause. And when she opened it, there was a small woman on the step with a covered pie plate wrapped in a blue kitchen towel and a canvas tote over her shoulder. And the woman took one look at Nettie's face and told her, "Oh, honey, you have your grandmother's mouth." Estelle was 68. She wore a violet cardigan and the kind of half-moon glasses that hung on a beaded chain around her neck. Her hair was a soft steel color that she had. Nettie would learn colored herself every 7 weeks in her kitchen sink for the last 20 years. She had bridged with Elowen every Tuesday afternoon since 1984. She had missed one Tuesday. That was the Tuesday Elowen went into hospice. She came in. She set the pie plate on the workbench, which made Warren wince because a workbench was not a table. She took off her coat. She looked at Warren, looked at Nettie. "Well, so it's the two of you now," Estelle said. Warren. "Don't Estelle me, Warren, pretty. I have been waiting 89 days to walk into this house, and I want a piece of my own pie." Nettie tried not to laugh. Estelle sliced the pie. Apple. Warren produced 3 chip plates from a shelf Nettie had not noticed before. Estelle took the biggest slice for herself and sat down in the front room in the upholstered chair nearest the window and set her plate on her knee. She told Nettie without preamble that Elowen had once said the day Estelle met her would be the day Estelle would want to weep. Elowen had never said why. Nettie did not know what to say. Estelle told her she was the granddaughter Elowen had waited for. "I didn't, hush, honey. I know you didn't. That is exactly why she waited." Estelle ate 2 bites of pie. Then she opened the tote at her feet and took out a photograph album with a green cloth cover. It was the kind of album where the pages had those little corner sleeves that had been going out of style since 1978. She set it on the small side table between the chairs. She had brought it, she said, because there were things in it Nettie's grandmother would have wanted her to know before her sisters decided what version of Elowen they were going to tell her about. Nettie sat down in the second chair. From across the room, very quietly, Warren said her name. Estelle looked up, told him she loved him like a brother-in-law she did not deserve. But this child had been given a house and a tenant and a boarded-up walk on the roof and no explanation. And Estelle was 80% sure her sisters were going to try to sell it out from under her by the end of next month, which meant she needed the version of the story that had them in it. Warren did not answer. He turned away. He went back to the workbench. Estelle patted the album once with the flat of her hand. She would leave it, she said. Nettie could look at it when she was alone. But right now what she wanted to tell her was one thing. She leaned forward. Her half-moon glasses caught the light. "Your grandmother was terrified of Cressida." Nettie's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Not afraid of. Terrified. 2 different things. She was afraid of Bettina in a soft way, the way you are afraid of a person you cannot help. But Cressida she was terrified of because Cressida reminded her of her own mother. And her own mother, honey, was a woman who once locked Elowen in a coal cellar for 6 hours in 1942 because she had refused to sing a hymn correctly at church. Elowen never told her granddaughters that story. She told me. She told me because I asked, and because I was the only person on earth Elowen ever admitted anything to, and because the truth is that Elowen spent her entire life trying to make sure the women in her family did not become her mother. Nettie set the fork down. Estelle picked up her own pie again. Told her Elowen had written a will the way a woman writes a map through a minefield. She had given the sisters what she thought they would need to be safe. And she had given Nettie what she thought she would need in order to be a person who was not them. Nettie could not quite look at her. "That is not," she said quietly, "how it feels." "I know, honey. It feels like she gave them everything. I know. It feels like a punishment. I know. Then why?" Estelle set her plate down. Because a punishment is not the same as an assignment, and your grandmother never in her life gave you a punishment. Not one. Look me in the eye, Nettie Fairchild. Did she ever? Nettie looked at her. She thought back. She could not think of one. 15 months of hospice, 24 years of childhood. Not one. The wall did the small, hollow, not hollow thing again in her chest. Estelle wanted to show her something, she said, but not today. Today she would eat her pie. Today she would unpack her bags. Today she would let Warren stop pretending he was sorting screws over there. Tomorrow she would come sit at Estelle's kitchen table on Benefit Street, and Estelle would show her the letters her grandmother had written her about Nettie when Nettie was 7, when she was 11, when she was 16, when she was 19, and again this past October. Nettie nodded. She could not speak. Estelle stood. She kissed the top of Nettie's head as if she had known her since Nettie was small. Which in a way she had. You are already so much more like her than you know. She left the pie plate. She let herself out. Nettie sat with the album unopened on her knee for a long time after the door clicked shut. Warren from the workbench said nothing. He was clamping a chair rung. His right hand rested flat on the wood so it did not shake. His left hand did the tightening. 29 hours in this house, and something in her life had shifted 5 feet to the left. Bettina called at 7:12 that evening. Nettie was in the kitchen. She had been trying with limited success to boil water on a stove that had 2 working burners and one that made a low, insulting hiss. Her phone rang. The screen said Bet, which was the name Aloan had written on the front of every birthday card she had ever mailed her middle granddaughter. Nettie answered. Bettina's voice came in fast and thin. Nettie was asked whether she was sitting, standing at the stove. Sit. Nettie sat. There was a pause on the other end. Nettie could hear in the background the soft clatter of the salon closing down for the night. Blow dryers being coiled, chairs being turned. The little bell over the door as somebody left. Bettina had a way of calling from work because she could not stand to say hard things in her apartment where the walls remembered them. Bettina had done a thing that day, she told Nettie. She had gone into the drawer in Cressida's kitchen, the one with the takeout menus, because Cressida had asked her to grab a menu for a client dinner, and there had been an envelope in there. Under the menus, it had had a Blackthorn Realty Partners logo on the front. She had opened it. Nettie's stomach went cold. She had opened it, Bettina repeated, because she had been standing in Cressida's kitchen and had thought, if this is what I think it is, I do not get to pretend I did not see it. So she had opened it, and it was an MOU. What's an MOU? A Memorandum of Understanding. Signed, countersigned, dated November 18th. Nettie did the math. November 18th, 6 days after her grandmother had entered hospice. 12 days before Nettie had asked Cressida if she could come sit with them one evening because Nettie had not slept in 70 hours. 12 days before Cressida had said, I have an early meeting. For all 3 buildings, Bettina told her. Pemberton, Fenway, Larkin Row. But Larkin Row wasn't hers to sign. I know. It wasn't even hers. I know. Nettie stood up. She walked to the window over the kitchen sink. Outside on Larkin Road, the street lamp was throwing a wet yellow circle onto the sidewalk. In the circle, a dog was walking a very small woman in a very large coat. Nettie watched them until they turned the corner, because she did not know what else to do with her eyes. There's a deadline, Bettina told her. Of course there is. 45 days from the date of probate, which was 6 days ago, which meant 39 days. Which meant that in 39 days, a company called Blackthorn Realty Partners was expecting 3 signatures on a purchase agreement for all 3 of her grandmother's buildings, and one of those signatures Cressida was expecting to obtain in some fashion from Nettie, by persuasion or by pressure or by exhausting her. Bet. Nettie. Why are you telling me this? There was a long silence. Then Bettina said in the smallest voice Nettie had ever heard her use that she had been standing on the wrong side of this family for a very long time, and she did not know if she could move. But she wanted Nettie to know where she was, so that if she did move, Nettie would know it was toward her. Nettie leaned her forehead against the cold glass over the sink. Okay, she said. Okay. She thought of Cressida's hand back at Faraday's office 2 days ago, pale at the base of her ring finger. Thought of the word repositioned. Thought of the fact that Cressida had at Alohan's memorial kept touching her own throat as if to check whether the necklace was still there. Cressida had wanted the necklace. Bettina had wanted the earrings. Nettie had wanted her grandmother to be alive. The three wants had not been comparable. But Cressida had, in the 6 days since the will was read, moved from wanting the necklace to wanting to make sure the necklace paid for itself, and Nettie had, in that same 6 days, moved from wanting her grandmother to be alive to something she did not yet have a name for. Bet, she said again. Yeah. Did she know Grandma was already sick when she signed the MOU? Yes. Long silence. Yes. Nettie thanked her. She hung up. She stood at the sink. The kettle had started to whistle. She turned off the burner. She did not make the tea. She walked into the front room. Warren was still at the workbench. He had put down the clamp. He was watching her. He did not ask what the call had been. She did not tell him. She would tell him. Just not tonight. She went upstairs. She lay on the brass bed in the second-floor front room in her clothes and her socks and her coat, and she looked up at the water stain on the ceiling, and she counted the tiny cracks that ran through the plaster from the stain outward, and she counted 47 of them before she made herself stop. 47. Because, of course, because of the boiler pump. Because sometimes the number that was going to break your family had been sitting in the ceiling above your head the whole time. Sleep did not come. She did not know it yet, but Warren downstairs in the front room sat awake in the chair by the workbench for the second night in a row, with the small brass key on the paper tag still lying flat in front of him on the wood. The next morning, Kessler Whitmore came to Pemberton Row. Nettie was not supposed to be there. Cressida had not invited her. But Bettina had at 6:45 that morning texted the address and the time, and the words, "Please come." Nettie came. Pemberton Row was 5 blocks north of Larkin Row, a 3-story building the color of dark honey brick with black shutters and a small stone porch with 2 urns that had been empty since November. In the lobby, the tile was black and white, laid in a pattern that had been considered fashionable in 1928 and had never really gone out of fashion because Pemberton Row had never really updated. Alohan had bought this building in 2001, the year of the photograph. She had bought it with her husband's insurance money. Nettie had never known that until Estelle had let it drop the day before. Kessler Whitmore was standing in the middle of the lobby with a black folder in his hand, in a smile Nettie had learned over the last 2 weeks to associate with people who use the word aligned in the first 2 sentences of any conversation. I was 42. He had a haircut that had cost more than Nettie's weekly grocery budget. He wore a suit that had been aligned with something. His shirt was aligned with something else. He looked up when Nettie came in and observed that she must be the third one. Nettie did not respond. Cressida turned around fast. She had a coffee in her left hand. She was pretending she had not seen Nettie come in until now. She introduced her to Kessler brightly as her youngest sister, the one who held the Larkin Row property. Kessler extended his hand. Nettie took it. His grip was firm and dry. His eyes were a very light hazel, the color of a whiskey somebody wealthy had not finished. He told her he had just been explaining to her sisters the value proposition his team was prepared to structure across the portfolio. Bettina stared at the floor. Cressida drank her coffee. Kessler kept going. He talked about phased rent optimization. He talked about repositioning the tenant mix. He talked about aligned buyer profiles. He talked about the strong bones of the properties and the ways in which those bones could be made to work harder. And Nettie stood by the mailboxes in the lobby of the building where her grandmother had signed papers in 2001, wearing a green cardigan, and heard for the first time what her grandmother's life work sounded like when a stranger tried to sell it. A door opened on the first floor. A woman came out with a canvas grocery bag over one shoulder. 70, a silver braid down her back, pink slippers on her feet. She stopped in the lobby, looked at Kessler, at Cressida, at Bettina, at Nettie. Oh, there she is. Cressida forced a smile, started to introduce her. Hush, honey. Thora Whitfield had known Eloan Fairchild for 19 years. She had lived in apartment 2B at Pemberton Row since 2006. Her husband had died in that apartment. She had raised her grandson for 8 months in that apartment when his mother had gone to rehab. She could hear the radiator in that apartment through the wall from her own bed, and she would say later tell within 4 seconds if it was cycling correctly. She looked at Nettie, told her she looked like her grandmother. Nettie's throat did something small. Then Thora looked at Kessler. She had heard the word optimization, she said. Kessler's smile flickered. He agreed it was one word. It was a stupid word. Baby, I am 70. I have been called every word this world has for a black woman with an opinion. I have earned the right to tell you that yours is a stupid word. Cressida made a small noise. Kessler recovered his smile. Bettina behind them both put her hand over her mouth. Thora turned back to Nettie. Walter's radiator, she said, was knocking again. Had started around 11:30 the night before. Nobody had come. When did you call? Yesterday morning. Nettie looked at Kessler. They were in the process of onboarding the property into their maintenance queue, he told her. Baby said, Thora, you have been in that process for 6 weeks. The queue has protocols, which was when Nettie took out her phone. Cressida saw it and told her not to. Nettie called Warren. He answered on the second ring. Warren, Walter's radiator is knocking again. Started 11:30 last night. Not fixed. Which one is knocking? Front or bedroom? Thora in the background bedroom. Bedroom, Nettie relayed. Ask Walter if somebody painted the radiator. Thora answered before Nettie could relay. The company from October painted them all. Then they painted the vents shut, Warren said. Same problem as last time. Also ask him, did they shim it or did they just take my shim out? The man from October said Walter's radiator was pitched wrong, Thora reported through Nettie. He took out something. Walter said he did not like it. His words were they took the little metal piece. There was a beat on the phone. Then Warren gave her the parts. Bedroom radiator, front right foot, a stainless steel shim, a 1/4 inch tapered, a spare on Larkin Row in the workbench top drawer right side in a small yellow envelope. Vent was a Hoffman 1A. There were 3 in the same drawer back left. Set the vent first, then slide the shim under the front right foot only, not both feet. Do not paint over the new vent. Anyone who painted over the new vent, he added, would be visited by him personally, and he did not travel. Nettie relayed. Thora looked at Kessler. 32 seconds, she told him. Kessler started to answer. That is 32 seconds, said Thora, on a problem you were going to send me a professional for in 6 to 12 weeks. Cressida looked at the floor. Bettina wrote something on her legal pad. Nettie stood very still and did not smile. Because if she smiled, it would be smug, and Warren had once in front of her said the words, smug is a small idea in a shiny hat, and she had not been able to forget the sentence since. She simply held the phone, thanked him. He told her to tell Thora her braid was still the prettiest thing in that building. Thora, without changing expression, told her to tell Warren Pretty his mustache still looked like it lost a fight. Warren hung up. Kessler adjusted his tie, which was Nettie decided the moment she stopped being afraid of him. Because a man in a suit that expensive should never adjust his tie in a lobby where a woman in pink slippers has just laughed at him. It communicated a great deal about the interior structure of his confidence. She did not know yet, standing there, that Kessler Whitmore's contract with Cressida was on a 30-day termination clause, and that Cressida had, in her own bedroom the night before, cried for 18 minutes into a pillow because she had realized she had signed the wrong management company and did not know how to say so out loud. Nettie only knew in that moment that she was watching a small piece of a plan begin to crack from the inside. She left the lobby. She did not say goodbye to Cressida. Bettina followed her to the sidewalk. Nettie. Bet. Bettina told her she did not know how to move yet. I know, but I moved a little today. By calling you. I know, Bettina's eyes were wet. Nettie did not hug her. Not yet, not for 2 more weeks. But she squeezed Bettina's wrist once and let go, which was in the private grammar of the Fairchild sisters, the closest thing to grace they had ever exchanged. Nettie went back to Larkin Row. She walked. She did not take the car. She wanted the 15 blocks. She wanted the cold air. She wanted more than anything the specific silence of a Providence February morning when the plows had already gone by and the salt was still bright on the sidewalks. And every third house had a wreath still up because in New England, you kept the wreath up until Lent, even if you were not religious. She thought about the phone call, 32 seconds, about Warren's voice on the other end, dry and even listing part numbers in drawer positions, the way a priest lists the stations of a cross, about the way Kessler had said aligned buyer profiles, about the way her grandmother had said once in the hospital on a morning. Nettie would not remember, she remembered until years later. Honey, do not ever let anybody talk about a house the way they would talk about a boat. Houses are not boats. Houses stay put and take on your smell. Boats leave. She turned the corner onto Larkin Row. There was a girl sitting on the front step of 1849. Nettie stopped. The girl was 14, maybe 15. Small, a navy blue puffer coat 2 sizes too large, and a pair of green wool mittens that had been hand-knitted by somebody who had loved her enough to make the thumbs slightly different sizes. She had a book open on her knees. The book had a torn white sticker on the spine that read, in library marker ink, Prov Pub Liber Ref Wildmush New Eng. She looked up when Nettie's shadow reached her. Her eyes were a pale, watchful green. Are you her? The voice was slow. It was formal. It was the voice of a person who had, for reasons that had nothing to do with age, been reading too many books written by people who were dead. I am who Nettie asked carefully. The one Miss Estelle sent me to. She said if I came around 10:40 a.m. and did not knock, you would find me on your way in, and you would not be angry because you have your grandmother's mouth. And your grandmother was, in Miss Estelle's exact words, incapable of turning a small girl away from a step. Nettie stood there. She was at that moment still 89% stunned by the phone call at Pemberton and 11% by the fact that Estelle Prewitt had apparently an entire delivery system for people. Who are you? Juno Baxter. How old are you, Juno Baxter? 14. Where do your parents live? The girl looked down at the book on her knees. She did not answer for a very long time. Nettie, who had once been 14 and once been the person nobody had known where to place, sat down on the step next to her without waiting to be invited. Juno. They're gone. How long? 8 months and 11 days. I'm sorry. Everyone says that. I know, but I mean it, and you can tell me later whether I mean it. Juno did not look up, but the small muscle at the corner of her jaw softened by a fraction. Mrs. Estelle was her grandmother, she said. Her father had been Estelle's son. The car had gone off the road in Massachusetts. She lived with Estelle now, except that Estelle was not always well, and when she was not well, Juno came here. Here, to Mr. Pretty. Nettie's head turned. You come here to Warren. Han does not talk very much, which suits me. He lets me sit at the workbench and read, and when I am done reading, he lets me use the small sandpaper on things. I have been sanding a footstool for 6 weeks. It is not finished. It does not have to be. That is why I come. The February wind moved down Larkin Row. Nettie looked at the door of 1849, then at the child. This was not in the will. This was not in Faraday's envelope. But this was what he had been protecting. Warren had not once mentioned Juno. Not once in 2 days said a word about the fact that a 14-year-old girl came to his workbench to sand a footstool. Because Warren had understood in the exact way an old carpenter understands that a person who had just been told she had inherited a house did not need to be told in the same breath that she had inherited a child's grieving. He had waited. He had waited for Estelle to send her. Nettie stood up. She held out her hand. Juno, yes, come inside, it's cold. The girl looked up. Her face did not change, but her hand came out of the mitten and took Nettie's hand briefly the way a person tests a stove before touching it. They went in together. Warren was at the workbench. He looked up when the door opened, saw Juno, saw Nettie. His face did the very smallest thing at the corner of his mouth, which was Nettie was learning the way his face expressed relief. "You're back," he said to Juno. "I am back." The library was cold. "Sit." Juno sat. She opened the book. She turned to a page marked with a scrap of red thread. She began without further comment to read about the difference between a chanterelle and a jack-o'-lantern mushroom. Warren looked at Nettie. Nettie looked at Warren. Neither of them said anything, which was itself a whole sentence. Nettie went upstairs an hour later, not to unpack, to do the thing she had been circling since 7 a.m. She went to the second floor. She went to the third. On the third floor landing in the ceiling above the small linen closet, there was a rectangular panel of painted wood with a small brass ring set into it. 22 years of layers of White House paint had all but hidden the ring. Nettie had noticed it that morning when she came down. She had not said anything to Warren. She stood under it now. She looked up. She got a chair from the linen closet, placed it carefully, and climbed onto it. The ring was small. It was cold. It moved half an inch when she pulled and then stopped. Warren's voice came from the bottom of the stairs. Her name. She froze. "Yeah, I know what you're doing." "Yeah." "The hinges are stuck. There's a pry bar on the workbench. The small one. Blue handle." She climbed down. She went and got it. Warren watched her come back up the stairs. He did not follow. He stayed at the bottom, which was she understood his way of telling her that this next part was hers. Because Aloan had built this. Because Aloan had trusted at some point 22 years ago that a person who would one day belong to this house would find the ring and would understand it belonged to her. Because Warren, who had helped nail the panel shut in the fall of 2003, had never in 22 years opened it again. Nettie put the pry bar into the seam. She worked it slowly. The paint cracked in a thin line all around the panel. A soft dust came down. The hinges made a small, tired complaint. She worked the bar a quarter inch further, a quarter inch further, a quarter inch further, and then the whole panel dropped down on rusted hinges and hung there above her head like a mouth that had opened after a very long silence. Above the panel, there was a small, dark stairwell. 4 wooden steps, cobwebs, but not many. And at the top of the stairs, a second wooden door, this one held shut only by a simple slide bolt. Nettie climbed the 4 steps. She did not breathe. She slid the bolt. She pushed the door, which opened onto the widow's walk. The February sky opened above her like the inside of a shell. The city of Providence stretched out gray and small. She could see the Superman building. She could see the church spire on Angel Street. She could see far to the east the flat metallic sheet of Narragansett Bay. The widow's walk itself was a rectangle of gray oak plank about 8 feet by 6. The scrollwork of the iron railing was black and rough. 136 winters had gotten into it. In the center of the platform, laid flat on the planks, was a single sheet of plywood, nailed to the deck. The board that had been nailed here in the fall of 2003. Nettie knelt. She used the pry bar. The nails came up one by one. Old nails, square-headed. Someone had used old-fashioned nails on purpose. She lifted the plywood. Beneath it, set flush into the deck, was a small square hatch cut into the planks, about the size of a piano bench seat. A ring, a leather strap. She lifted the hatch. Inside was a wooden box. Oak, dovetailed. The joinery was Warren's. Nettie could tell at a glance because she had downstairs been watching him clamp dovetails for 2 days. She lifted the box out. She sat down on the planks with the box on her knees and the February wind moving her hair, and Providence spread out beneath her and something inside her chest that was neither grief nor joy, but the older, quieter thing that lived under both of them. She opened the box. Inside were 1 brass key on a paper tag, 1 black and white photograph of Warren and Odessa on their wedding day. Odessa in a knee-length cream dress with a small bouquet. Warren in a borrowed jacket. Both of them smiling with the specific, unrepeatable smile of 2 people who had just decided, and 7 envelopes. Each envelope was cream-colored. Each was addressed in her grandmother's blue ink hand to the same person. My Nettie. Each was dated. The dates ran from May of the previous year, when Aloan had first been given 6 months, to the 12th of November, when Aloan had entered hospice. One letter a month for the last 7 months of her grandmother's life. Nettie sat on the widow's walk of 1849 Larkin Row, with 7 letters in her lap, Improvidence quiet around her. Her hand was shaking. She opened the first one, May. My Nettie. If you are reading this, then the house has already given you its first lesson, which is that it is not a house. It is a woman. And she has been waiting for you the way I waited for you. Do not open all of these at once. Read one a week. The house will teach you what you need in the order you need it. I will not be there to teach you, but I have left the teacher in the front room. He does not know I am leaving him to you. I have not told him. If I had told him, he would have refused. So you must be gentle with him. He has been standing in that room for 22 years with a lantern for a woman who thought she was the only one who could see it. That woman was me. I am handing you the lantern. Love, Grandma. Nettie's eyes did not spill. They filled and held. She put the letter back in the envelope. She held all 7 envelopes against her chest. She looked out over Providence. She said out loud to the cold air, to her grandmother, to the row of 6 houses beneath her, to the small girl reading about mushrooms on the workbench downstairs, to the man whose right hand still shook when he set down a cup. Okay. Just okay. She climbed back down. She closed the hatch. She replaced the plywood but did not nail it down. She left the door at the top of the stairs standing open. She came down the 4 steps. She pushed the panel closed above her head. She left the ring exposed. She held the 7 letters in her left hand and the brass key on the paper tag in her right. Warren was in the front room. He was standing at the workbench. He had heard her coming down the stairs. He looked up when she came in. He saw the key. His face did not move, but his right hand, which had been resting on the wood, drew back an inch, as if the wood had suddenly become warm. Warren. Yeah. There's a key up there. I know. There's a tag on the key. I know. The tag has your name on it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room to the workbench. He crouched. He was slow, and he used the workbench to lower himself. Under the workbench, on the underside of the bottom drawer, hidden by the drawer front, there was a small square of oak that Nettie had thought was decorative trim. He looked up at her from his crouch, told her Aloan had made him swear he would not tell her where it was. Said when the day comes, if she is worth the house, she will find it. Said if she is not worth the house, then it does not matter, and the paper can stay hidden. Nettie did not answer. She knelt beside him. She put the brass key into a small keyhole she could not see from a standing position hidden under the drawer front. She turned. The oak trim clicked. Warren gently opened a small compartment about 6 inches deep. Inside was a folded piece of legal paper sealed with red wax and Aloan Fairchild's signature. Nettie lifted it out. She unfolded it on her knees on the floor of the front room with Warren beside her. It was a beneficiary deed, signed by her grandmother 2 years ago, notarized, dated, filed, 25% of Pemberton Row to Warren Pretty, for services rendered in gratitude and compensation for 22 years of labor, never named in a lease, never paid at market rate, never entered onto any tax record, never once acknowledged in front of my daughters or my granddaughters, and for love, which is a word I did not know how to use out loud, but which I have always meant. At the bottom of the page, in her grandmother's blue ink hand, one more sentence. Faraday does not know this exists. Do not tell him. Nettie will know when to use it. Warren did not move for a long time. Then very quietly he reached out. He took the paper from her hands. He held it. And for the first time in the 3 days she had known him, Warren Pretty's right hand shook, not with the tremor, but with the older, deeper thing tremors were sometimes trying to hide. Elowen. Just her name. Just once. The way you say the name of a person who has, from a very long distance, finally reached across a room and touched your shoulder. The storm came in on a Tuesday and stayed until Thursday. The National Weather Service had called it a nor'easter, which was the New England word for a storm that had come up the coast the wrong way and was taking it personally. Sleet by 9 p.m., snow by midnight, winds gusting to 48, a coastal advisory in effect from Cape Cod down to Point Judith. Nettie had heard the alert on her phone at 4 in the afternoon. Warren had heard it on the little radio he kept plugged in on the workbench, the one with its wooden back removed and its tubes glowing dim amber, and he had reached over and turned it off before the meteorologist finished the sentence. Southeast. He had not looked up from the mortise he was cutting. Southeast is bad, Nettie asked. Southeast is the worst kind, comes in under the back of a roof. She set down her sandpaper. She went upstairs. She put a folded towel on the windowsill of the second-floor front bedroom. She looked up at the water stain on the ceiling in the corner nearest the fireplace. It had been dry for 2 weeks. Dry was a promise nobody made on purpose. She went back downstairs. She checked the door of the widow's walk. She left the loose plywood in place but not re-nailed. Because Warren had told her 3 weeks ago not to nail it back down. Because the widow's walk was not something you closed. It was something you were entrusted with. The rain began at 11:40, the sleet at 12:15. The wind picked up sometime after 1 a.m., and by 2:30 it was making a low, steady keening sound against the front windows that Nettie recognized from her grandmother's descriptions of childhood in New Bedford as the sound the sea makes when it has decided the shore has been rude to it. Nettie lay in bed. She did not sleep. She kept the lamp off. She listened. She thought about Warren in the front room 3 floors below her in the wingback chair he had brought over from his own bedroom, refusing to go to sleep on principle because a storm this size did not deserve to be ignored. She thought about the 7 letters in the top drawer of her dresser. She had opened 4 of them now, one a week the way her grandmother had said. She thought about the 5th one still sealed in its cream envelope in her coat pocket by the door, because she had a feeling. Because a person who had spent 15 months at a hospice bed learned to trust a certain kind of feeling. Because when the wind moved like that against a 136-year-old roof, you did not sleep. You listened. You waited for the house to tell you what it needed, which it did, at 3:17 a.m. The sound was not a crash. It was a long, low, splintering complaint, which was the sound wood makes when it has been asked to hold something up for a very long time and has finally quietly in the deep hours of a February morning decided it cannot hold it up for the next hour. The sound came from above her head, from the roof, from the corner where the water stain was. Nettie sat up. That. Then before she could think anything else, the ceiling in the corner of her bedroom bulged, sagged, cracked, dropped a wet handful of plaster onto the bed 6 inches from her pillow. Then more plaster, then a slab of pink insulation, then a length of rotted wood that must have been 30 pounds, then wet snow, which was coming in, through the actual sky, which had opened. She was out of bed before her body caught up with her decision. Because that was what the last year had taught her, that the body moved first and the mind followed later. That you could put a nightgown on a woman who no longer weighed 90 pounds and only start shaking afterwards in a kitchen alone while the kettle boiled. Warren was already on the landing, barefoot, plaid pajama top, cotton pants, his right hand on the rail, his left hand holding the flashlight he had grabbed from the workbench on the way up the stairs. He had come up 3 flights in the dark. He had come up in less than 40 seconds, which for a 71-year-old man with an essential tremor and a bad left knee was not physically possible, except that he had done it. Out. She was already out. Move. She moved. Another piece of the ceiling let go behind her. It hit the bed. It knocked the little lamp off the nightstand. Then a sheet of icy sleet blew in through the hole in the roof and swept across the room and knocked the framed photograph of Eloan off the dresser. Warren caught her wrist. His grip was steady, which was the thing that stayed with her later, because his hand was shaking. Because his hand had been shaking on and off for 2 years. Because the tremor lived in the muscle, but the grip was in the bone, and the bone was still there, and a person could be afraid and still hold up another person if the bone was there. Somewhere downstairs, the smoke alarm began to shriek. Not fire, he told her before she could ask. Wet insulation on a wire. Panel first, then main. They went down. The house was making a sound, not a groan, a cough. The particular sound of a building that has taken a hit and is deciding whether to lie down or get back up. Water was already running along the ceiling of the second-floor hallway. It found a light fixture. The bulb popped. Warren pushed Nettie ahead of him down the stairs to the first floor, then to the basement door. He unlocked the padlock with a small silver key. He handed her the flashlight. Panel. I know. She threw the main. The whole house went dark. The alarm died mid-shriek, and then in the dark, in the sudden absence of the alarm, Nettie heard the storm. Really heard it. Wind, sleet against brick, wet snow falling into her bedroom from the sky. Somewhere far off, a plow scraping against blacktop. Somewhere closer, the slow, patient sound of water finding all the small places that had been dry 20 minutes ago and were not going to be dry again for a long time. Water main, show me. I walked her behind the furnace. The flashlight beam moved across the pipes. He pointed. She turned the wheel, slowly. The valve moved, because Warren had oiled it 3 weeks ago. Because Warren oiled the important valves every October. She turned it until it stopped. She heard 3 floors above them, the water in the walls slow, then stop. Warren sat down, right there on the wooden step at the bottom of the basement stairs. His right hand fell into his lap. He was 71, and he had come up 2 flights of stairs in the dark to pull a 20-year-old girl out of a bedroom that was raining, and he was in a plaid pajama top with wet snow melting in his hair, and now his body was allowed to notice. Nettie sat down beside him. She did not touch him. They stayed like that for a long, long minute, breathing. Warren spoke first. Your grandmother would be very angry with me. Why? Because I let her house drop a ceiling on you. Nettie leaned her shoulder briefly against his shoulder. You caught me before it did. He did not answer, but his shoulder did not move away. Calvin the roofer came at 8:12 a.m. in a red pickup that trailed rock salt out of its wheel wells. He climbed the ladder in the gray dawn light and looked at the hole in the roof for perhaps 10 seconds. He did not smile. Calvin did not smile at roofs. Calvin smiled at children and at coffee and at the receptionist, at the parts counter at the Home Depot in Warwick. And he did not smile at anything else because roofing was a serious profession, and he had told Nettie one afternoon, a serious man. He came down the ladder. That was not the sleet, he told her. That was the wood. That wood was going to go this winter. It was going to go the second week of March, or the third week of March, or last night. It went last night. He was sorry. Nettie was in Warren's spare wool coat. Her feet were in Warren's spare wool socks. Her feet did not seem to belong to her yet. How much? Calvin took his cap off, rubbed his forehead. He listed it. Full front section, new sheathing, sistering the rafters, underlayment, shingles, interior demo, insulation, plaster, bedroom ceiling was done. Could not do it in pieces this time. Calvin, yes, ma'am. How much? He named a number. Nettie's throat did the thing where it forgets how to swallow. Because the number started with 2, because the number ended in 3 zeros. Because that was almost exactly the number she had been afraid of since the first afternoon she had stood on the sidewalk in front of 1849 Larkin Row and told herself she was not selling this house today. Behind her from the front step, Warren said very quietly, Calvin. Warren. Split it 4 ways, not my policy. Warren once fixed the ductwork at your father's shop in the winter of 1994 for $200 and a slice of pie. Nettie turned her head. Estelle Prewitt was standing on the sidewalk. Plum-colored coat, matching hat, a paper cup of coffee in each hand. She had, Nettie realized, been walking to Larkin Row since 7:15, in slush that was ankle-deep at the corner of Broad and Larkin, in wet snow that had turned to gray sludge on the sidewalks. She was 68 years old. She had walked 11 blocks in that mess because Bettina had texted her, and Estelle Prewitt was a woman who arrived. Calvin looked at Estelle, looked at the sky, looked at Warren. Put his cap back on. 4. Fine. 4. But the first payment is now, 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 because the alternative is I roll off this project and you do not want the alternative. Nettie nodded. Estelle handed her one of the paper cups. Lied about your grandfather's pie, she told her quietly so Warren would not hear. Nettie took the coffee. I know. Good. Calvin's crew came at 9. They tarped the roof. They braced the framing. They removed over the course of the day the ruined section of ceiling from Nettie's bedroom. They hauled out 4 full contractor bags of wet plaster. Nettie's mattress, saturated through, went to the curb. Elowen's black wool coat, which had been hanging on the closet door, was pulled down, spread out on Warren's workbench, and toweled. Warren did the toweling. Warren did the toweling for a full 40 minutes. He did not look up. He did not speak. He worked the towel across the wool the way you would groom a horse that had been out in a storm. Nettie watched him. She did not say anything, because she understood, because the coat was Elowen. Cressida came at 10:45. She parked her white Volvo at the curb. She did not come to the walk. Nettie went down. They stood on the sidewalk beside the Volvo. Cressida had a manila envelope in her right hand. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes were red. She had not slept either. Bettina told me. She texted you. At 4 a.m. Why? Because she wanted me to know before Blackthorn did. Nettie looked at the envelope. Cressida followed her look. She had a proposal, she said. Cress, read it before you say anything. She held it out. Nettie did not take it. Cressida's hand was very steady. Cressida's chin was not. I can pay for the roof, not out of my pocket, out of Pemberton's reserve. In exchange, we treat the house as part of the pooled estate. Sell after repairs, split 3 ways. You get nursing school. You get a car that isn't to Sean's. I get to breathe. Bet gets to stop being afraid of me. She paused. Her voice caught. Bet gets to stop being afraid of me, Nettie. Nettie looked at her sister. She really looked. Because she had been looking at Cressida for years and she had not really looked. Because grief had made all 3 of them meaner in the specific way of the Fairchild women. Because Cressida had come to Larkin Row the day of the funeral and said this house is going to eat everything you have, and she had said it, Nettie now understood, not because she wanted the house, but because she was afraid of what it would do to Nettie, which was not the same as love, but which was not nothing. I can't take the offer. Cressida's face closed. Why? Nettie reached into the inside pocket of her coat. The 5th letter. She had opened it at 5:30 that morning, in Warren's kitchen, alone, in the light of the emergency lantern he had set on the counter after they came up from the basement. She had not planned to open it early. She had planned to wait until Sunday. But she had known sitting there that Cressida would come. That was Cressida's grammar. Cressida arrived with envelopes. Cressida always thought a piece of paper was going to save her. Nettie held the 5th letter out. Cressida did not take it. What is that? A letter from Grandma. To me. To me. About you. Cressida did not move. The wind moved down Larkin Row. Somewhere a car horn honked. Somewhere farther off the public works trucks were still dumping salt. A cardinal landed on the wrought iron scrollwork of the Widow's Walk 3 stories above their heads, and then, thinking better of it, flew away in a small red flash against the gray. Cressida took the letter. She read it standing on the sidewalk, in her wool coat, in her knee-high boots, with her sister watching her, with a manila envelope full of a proposal to pool the estate still in her other hand. She read for 1 minute and 42 seconds. Nettie counted, because counting gave her something to do besides watch her sister's face. Cressida did not cry. Cressida had not in Nettie's memory ever allowed herself to cry in front of another person. She read to the end. She folded the letter. She handed it back. She knew. Yes. About the MOU. Yes. Before I did. Cressida bent her head. She did not look at Nettie for a long moment. A truck went past on the cross street, its chains clinking against the salt-white pavement. When she looked up again, her eyes were the color of wet slate. Because Bettina told her in October. Yes. Cressida looked away, down Larkin Row, at the 6 red brick houses, at the 6 iron widows' walks, at the one hole in the 5th roof from the corner now blue-tarped, with 2 of Calvin's men on it. "You do not know how afraid I have been," she said very quietly. Nettie thought of Bettina saying almost the same sentence on the phone 18 nights ago. Oh, oh, they have both been drowning, just in different rooms. She did not put her arms around her sister. But she took the manila envelope out of Cressida's hand, and without opening it, she walked to a snowbank at the curb and set it face down on top of the snow. She did not tear it, she did not throw it, she only set it there, as if to say this is not the shape of the answer. She came back to Cressida. She didn't want you afraid, Nettie told her. She wanted you honest. Cressida did not answer, but when Nettie held out her hand, Cressida took it. And they stood there for perhaps 10 seconds, 2 grown women on a sidewalk in Providence in the cold, without doing any of the extra work of hugging or crying or pretending. The envelope stayed in the snow. Estelle on the front step watched them and pressed her paper cup to her own mouth to hide her mouth. The workmen cleared the front bedroom by dark. Nettie and Warren stood in the doorway of the empty room. The bed was gone. The dresser had been moved to the middle bedroom to keep it dry. The floor was a raw, ugly patch of subfloor and joists. The ceiling was open to the tarped roof. The wind through the tarp made a small, persistent sighing. "It will be fine," said Warren. Nettie did not answer for a moment. Then Warren, "You need to tell me something." He looked at her. "2 things, actually." He did not answer. She said, "Your hand." He looked down at his right hand. He was, she saw, gripping the door frame to hide the tremor. He did not let go. "Yes, it's essential tremor. I've had it 2 years. It's not Parkinson's. It's not fatal. It's just in time it will make me useless with a chisel, which I have known since the day it started, which is why I have been teaching you to hold the peace." Nettie's stomach did something small. "You've been teaching me because you're losing it. I've been teaching you because I have 22 years of somebody else's grammar in my hands and I do not want it to die with the hands." She swallowed. "That's not fair. Fair is not one of the categories." He looked at her. "There is a second thing. I know. Tell me." He was quiet. Then very quietly, "Juno." Nettie's head came up. "What about Juno? She has been coming here longer than you know. Since June. Since 3 weeks after the accident. Estelle has not been well. Her heart has been doing something the doctors have not entirely agreed on. She could not always be at the house at 3:30 when Juno got home from school. So Juno came here. Since June. Since June." Warren, "I did not tell you. I did not tell you because you had just lost your grandmother, because you were living in a stranger's spare room and working nights in a hospital laundry, because I did not know if you would stay. And a 14-year-old girl who has just lost her parents does not need to be told again that her existence depends on a person deciding whether to stay." Nettie sat down on the floor of the empty bedroom. She sat right there in the sawdust. Warren did not sit. His knee would not have let him. He stood in the doorway and told her about Estelle. Moving to her daughters in Warwick. End of the month. Cardiologist had told Estelle she could not keep doing stairs. Estelle was asking formally whether Juno could spend the days here. Estelle would still be Juno's guardian. Legally. But the days, Warren said, Juno needed a workbench. Juno needed a person. Juno needed mostly to finish sanding that footstool at whatever pace she needed to finish sanding that footstool. Nettie put her face in her hands. "Not to cry, to hold something." "Warren Pretty," she said into her palms, "you have been running an underground shelter for a 14-year-old girl since June. In my grandmother's house. Under my grandmother's roof. And you did not tell me, I did not tell you. For 8 months, for 8 months. You said yes to Estelle. I said I would ask you." She looked up. His face was doing the thing. The thing where it did not move because if it moved he would not be able to hold it. Which was she now understood the way Warren Pretty carried grief. Which was she now understood the way Warren Pretty carried love. They were the same muscle in his face. She stood up. She wiped sawdust off her jeans. She walked past him out of the empty bedroom and down the stairs and into the front room. Juno was there. She had been there since Estelle had brought her over that afternoon. She was on Warren's workbench stool. She had the footstool between her knees. She had the fine sandpaper in her hand. She was at that moment sanding the crest rail of the second footstool she had begun 3 weeks ago. She did not look up when Nettie came in, because she had learned at 14 not to look up hopefully at doors that had already opened for her once, because she had been to too many houses, because you did not want the answer to be no while you were watching for it. Nettie sat down on the second stool. Juno. The girl looked up, her pale, watchful green eyes. How much of this footstool do you have left? 2 more evenings of the fine grade. Then the varnish. 2 more evenings here. Yes. And after that. The girl went still, because she had understood the question underneath the question. Nettie told her she was welcome here for as long as she wanted to be. During school days, after school, weekends, summers, if Estelle moved, if Estelle did not move, if her 5th footstool took a year, she did not have to finish any of them by any particular date. She did not have to talk if she did not want to talk. She did not have to say yes right now. Juno did not speak, but her small chin did something. And then in the quietest voice Nettie had ever heard from her, she told Nettie she did not know if she would cry. She was not sure. She had not cried since the accident. She had been waiting. Wait as long as you need to, Juno. Warren in the doorway coughed once, the kind of cough that a person does when they need somebody else to make a sound in the room besides their own. Juno at the workbench went back to her sandpaper. Her strokes were slow and even and careful. Nettie later that night in the middle bedroom in the dark on the sofa she and Warren had dragged over from the front room, thought about a woman named Elowen Fairchild, who had in the last year of her life given her granddaughter a house, and a tenant, and a boarded-up walk on the roof, and a set of 7 letters. And somehow a 14-year-old girl who was already there when the granddaughter arrived, hiding in a workshop, sanding a footstool no one had asked her to sand. Elowen had known. Elowen had somehow known, because that was what grandmothers did. The community meeting was scheduled for the Wednesday after the storm. The planning department had called it before the roof came down. Blackthorn Realty Partners had filed a request for rezoning on the block, and the ward office was required to hold a public hearing. Blackthorn was going to argue that the row could be modernized. The buildings were prepared to say structurally compromised. The neighborhood would benefit from coordinated redevelopment, which in New England grammar meant we would like to knock these down and put up condominiums. Nettie was going to speak. She had not planned to. She had planned to sit in the 3rd row. But at 4 p.m. on Tuesday, Warren had come out of his front room with 3 of the leather notebooks in his hands. He had set them on the kitchen counter, told her she would want these. He had put the 7th envelope on top of them. The last letter, Elowen's final one, dated the 12th of November, the day she had entered hospice. Not opened yet. Nettie had put her hand on the envelope. I was saving it. I know, save it for tomorrow night. Save it for the room. Save it for the reason she wrote it. She had not asked him how he had known. He had never read the letter. Of course he had not. But she was beginning to understand always known Elowen's grammar. Elowen had left a widow's walk hatch with a name written in it. Elowen would not have written 6 letters and skipped the 7th. Elowen was a woman who put on lipstick before she asked for anything. Elowen would want a room. Nettie put the letter in her coat pocket. She did not open it. The ward office on Broad Street was a low brick building with fluorescent lights that hummed slightly. The chairs were metal folding chairs. Somebody had made coffee in a large brown urn on a card table by the door. The reporter from the Providence Journal was in the front row with a small red notebook. Blackthorn's attorney was a man in his 50s in a very good suit. Kessler Whitmore sat behind him in an even better suit, on which he had, Nettie noticed, changed the tie color from mint green to a darker teal, which meant he was in his own private grammar taking this meeting seriously. Cressida was 3 rows back, in a plain black sweater. Her hair was down. She looked for the first time in weeks like a person and not like a plan. Bettina sat next to her. Bettina had told Nettie on the drive over that she had resigned from managing Pemberton with Cressida the day before. Not to abandon it, to free her hands. She wanted to run Fenway alone. Cressida had told her on the phone in a small voice, okay, which was in the Fairchild family a Rosetta Stone of a word. The tenants from Pemberton were in rows 2 and 3. Thora Whitfield in her black raincoat over her canvas grocery bag coat. Walter Ruiz in a collared shirt. 2 other older women Nettie had only met by first name. A young couple with a baby named Miles. Elowen had written Miles's name in her last ledger book next to the model number of the parents' crib. Estelle sat next to Nettie. On Nettie's other side was Juno. The girl had insisted on coming, in a green cardigan of Estelle's that reached past her knees. She had in the car on the way over told them she had never been in a room where people said things out loud to each other about a house. She did not want to miss it, which had made Warren in the passenger seat exhale through his nose in the silent laugh only Nettie had learned to hear. Warren sat behind them. His right hand was flat on his own knee. Blackthorn's attorney went first. He was efficient. He had numbers. He had photographs. He had projected on the small pull-down screen a drone image of the hole in the roof of 1849, taken the day after the storm. He described the row as structurally compromised. He described his client's willingness to work with current owners in a spirit of neighborhood revitalization. He used the word aligned 4 times. Kessler Whitmore did not speak. He nodded a lot. Then Alma Dela Cruz, the chair of the planning committee, opened the floor to statements from current owners and residents. Nettie stood up. She had thought her legs would shake. They did not shake. They were tired, but they held, because she had, over the past 3 weeks, learned that the body could carry things the mind was not sure it could carry. She walked to the small wooden podium at the front of the room. She adjusted the microphone. She looked out. She saw Cressida. She saw Bettina. She saw Estelle nodding once. She saw Juno, tiny in the cardigan, watching. She took the 7th letter out of her pocket. She did not open it yet. My name is Nettie Fairchild. I am 20 years old. 29 days ago, my grandmother, Alwyn Fairchild, left me a row house at 1849 Larkin Row subject to the tenancy of a man named Warren Pretty. She paused. She looked at Kessler Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore, this morning I called your firm to confirm one date. I asked whether Blackthorn Realty Partners had entered into any pre-existing agreements with any current owner of the Larkin Row property. Your assistant confirmed that a signed memorandum of understanding was executed on November 18th of last year. She did not know that my grandmother had entered hospice on November 12th, that my sister Cressida held power of attorney over none of the 3 properties, that at the time of that signing my grandmother was under palliative sedation, or that the document my sister signed included a property she did not on that date legally own. The room went very still. Cressida did not look up. Nettie kept her voice even. I am not saying this to shame my sister. I am saying it because it is a fact, and this room deserves facts. She lifted the letter. This is the last letter my grandmother wrote to me. She wrote it on the day she went into hospice. I have not opened it. I did not want to open it alone. I am opening it now, because she meant for it to be read in exactly this kind of room. She broke the seal. She unfolded the paper. Her hand did not shake. She read, My Nettie, if you are reading this now, it means that you have opened all the others and decided this house was worth staying with. It also means somebody has come to this town who thinks a building is only what it can be turned into. If you are reading this out loud in a room, then good. That room is the reason I wrote it. I want that room to know one thing. Nettie's voice caught for just an instant. She kept going. I owned Pemberton Row for 23 years, Fenway Court for 18, 1849, Larkin Row for 31. In all those years, the only man who ever knew how those buildings breathed was a man named Warren Pretty. He was never on a payroll. He was never on a lease that reflected what he did. He was never once thanked by name in a public place. I did not thank him. I did not know how. which is the failure of my life. So I am thanking him now in this room through you. Warren Pretty, please stand up. Nettie looked up from the paper. At the back of the room in the third row from the wall, Warren Pretty did not stand. He was frozen, not from stubbornness, from something else. Estelle turned around. Estelle nodded once. Warren stood, slowly, his right hand on the chair in front of him. His face had the specific stillness of a man who had in fact been standing since 2001 and had only just been given permission to notice. Nettie kept reading. In this envelope, which I gave my granddaughter to hand carry, and which she is reading to you now, is a copy of a beneficiary deed. It transfers 25% of Pemberton Row to Warren Pretty effective on the date of my death. It was signed 2 years ago. It was notarized by Winifred Osgood at Providence First Notary on Angel Street. It was filed with the Providence Registry of Deeds on the 7th of April 2 years ago. Instrument number 13782, book 472, page 209. It is real. Mr. Faraday will tell you it is not. That is because Mr. Faraday and I disagreed at the end. He is a competent lawyer. He is a poor friend. He does not know a filed instrument when he sees one. Nettie has the certified copy in the second envelope in her coat pocket. The room made a sound, not a gasp, the lower sound, the sound of 40 people understanding a sentence at the same time. Blackthorn's attorney looked at Kessler Whitmore. Kessler Whitmore looked down at his tie. For the first time, he seemed to know it had been the wrong tie. Nettie took the second envelope out of her coat pocket. She held up the deed. Alma Dela Cruz reached for it. She read it standing at her table. She looked up at Kessler. This changes the ownership stack, Mr. Whitmore. We will need to review. You will need to withdraw. She did not raise her voice. The Blackthorn attorney closed his folder. Nettie went back to the letter. Her voice was steady. I did not leave my granddaughter the smallest of my 3 buildings because she deserved the smallest. I left her the house that Warren lived in because I wanted them to find each other. Because I wanted her, when the roof went bad, to have somebody in the front room who had spent 22 years learning how to catch a house before it fell. And because I wanted him in the last chapter of his life to have somebody in the second floor front room who had spent 15 months learning how to hold a hand when it was cold. That is not a will. That is a matchmaking. A grandmother's kind, made of walls and roofs, and the small, stubborn refusal of a woman who did not know how to say thank you when she was alive. Warren, I am sorry. Nettie, I am proud. Bettina, my bet. Move. Cressida, my first, my hardest. Please, please stop being your grandmother. Yours, Elowen. Nettie folded the letter. The room was silent. Cressida had her hand over her mouth. Bettina was crying without moving. Thora Whitfield stood up, 70 years old, in a house coat under a black raincoat and pink slippers. She did not go to the microphone. She only spoke. Her voice was strong and slow. I have lived at Pemberton Row for 19 years. I did not know that man's name was Warren until 3 weeks ago. That is my failure. But it is also every landlord's failure who did not tell me. Elowen Fairchild was a landlord. She was not a saint. She was a woman who tried. She tried by keeping a man in a front room for 22 years and paying him in rent. She never adjusted for inflation. She should have paid him more. She should have said his name at the Christmas party. She should have introduced him to the woman in the mailbox line. She did not. And that is why we are here. Thora turned toward Warren. Mr. Pretty, you have fixed my radiator 4 times. You have never let me tip you. So instead, I would like to say in this room, in the presence of this reporter in this planning chair, and my landlord's granddaughters, thank you. Not for the radiator, for the 22 years. She sat down. Warren did not answer. He could not answer. His face was doing the thing. Nettie watched him. Hold on. We are almost through the room. Alma Dela Cruz cleared her throat. Blackthorn Realty Partners has withdrawn its rezoning application. This meeting is adjourned. The reporter wrote something in her red notebook. The Blackthorn attorney and Kessler Whitmore left the room without meeting anybody's eye. The young mother lifted Miles the baby up over her shoulders so Miles could see at the back of the room the older man who was still standing. Miles waved. Warren, in a movement that was small but real, waved back with his left hand. Bettina stood up. She walked all the way to the back of the room. She put her arms around Warren without asking permission. Warren did not know what to do with his hands. His hands did the shaking. Bettina held him anyway. Warren, after 3 full seconds, put one hand very lightly on the middle of Bettina's back. Cressida stayed in her chair. Cressida stared at the floor. Nettie came down from the podium. She did not go to Cressida yet. She went to Estelle. She sat down in the seat next to her. Estelle took her hand. Honey, she would be proud. She would be tired. Both. Juno was watching Warren. Warren, from the back of the room over the top of Bettina's shoulder, met Juno's eyes. Juno gave him the smallest possible nod. Warren gave her the smallest possible nod back, which was, in the private grammar of the two of them, everything. 3 days after the meeting, Cressida called. She called at 7:15 in the morning. Nettie was in Warren's kitchen boiling water on the 2 working burners of the stove. Nettie. Cress, I am selling my share of Pemberton. Nettie sat down. To who? To the tenants. A cooperative. Thora Whitfield has been quietly organizing one for 11 weeks. She did not tell me because she did not trust me, which was correct. Cress. The number will not make me rich. It will pay off Eric. It will let me start again. That is what I need. Okay, okay. Nettie held the phone. Then I love you. I am also very angry with you. Both are true. There was a very small silence on the other end. Then Cressida told her that was more grace than she had earned. That is what Grandma gave me. I am not paying it out of a different account. Cressida made a sound Nettie did not know Cressida could make. It was a laugh with wet in it. She told Nettie Bet had moved. I know. I called her yesterday. She is running Fenway alone. She fired the salon manager. She is very tired. She is happy. She sounds like she is 12. I know. I am going to try Nettie. I know that too. They hung up. Nettie put the phone on the counter. She looked out the kitchen window at the small square of Larkin Rowe's backyard. The snow was almost gone. In the corner of the yard, up against the fence, a single crocus had come up. A purple one. Alawan used to say the crocus at 1849 was older than her marriage. Alawan used to say a lot of things. Warren came into the kitchen. He set a small piece of paper on the counter. Cheap card stock, homemade, printed on Estelle Prewitt's inkjet printer, which Estelle would later insist printed in only 1 grade of gray, and everyone would have to accept the aesthetic. The card said Pretty and Fairchild Repair, Restoration, 1849, Larkin Rowe, Providence, by appointment. Nettie looked up. When did you make this? I did not. Estelle did. Yesterday. Brought over 40 of them this morning while you were on the phone. Nettie laughed. She could not help it. Warren did the small, silent laugh at the corner of his mouth. Pretty first, she noted. Not alphabetical, Estelle said, and I quote, alphabetical is a rule for people who are not paying attention. Warren has been standing in that front room since before you were born. He goes first. Nettie's throat did the thing where it forgets how to swallow. I'll allow it. They opened the workshop in April. Not with a ceremony. Warren did not have ceremonies. They put the small green painted sign in the front window on a Monday morning. The sign said the same thing as the business card. Estelle came with a coffee cake. Thora came with a dish of banana pudding and a stern nod. Bettina came in salon-scented clothes and brought 2 hand-knitted pot holders and a check for $100 for the workshop's first electric bill. Cressida did not come, but she sent that afternoon by courier a note that read in her tight handwriting, Congratulations, this is real. Love, Cress. Tashawn came with Miles the baby's mother, who lived at Pemberton, and Miles the baby who was learning to walk. Miles took his first assisted step on the floor of the Pretty and Fairchild workshop at 4:09 p.m. on the 12th of April, 7 weeks after the roof came down. Warren looked away when it happened, but not fast enough. Nettie caught the wet in his eyes. She did not mention it. The Widow's Walk was rebuilt in May. Calvin did the framing. Warren directed the joinery from a chair carried up to the roof for him. Juno passed the boards. Nettie hand-sanded the new oak railing where it joined the old iron scrollwork. They did not board the hatch shut when it was done. They left it open. They put a small bench up there, just plain oak, 2 seats, made in the workshop over 3 weekends. On the underside of the bench, Estelle painted in her careful hand for Eloan, who did not know how to say it, but meant it. On the 7th of June, 1 year and 4 months after Eloan Fairchild died, Nettie sat on the widow's walk of 1849 Larkin Row. Juno sat beside her. Juno was at that moment halfway through sanding her 3rd footstool. The first was in Cressida's apartment. Cressida had bought it. She had paid full retail. She had told Nettie on the phone that she did not want a family discount. She wanted a receipt. Warren was downstairs. Warren was at the workbench. He had good days and bad days. His right hand shook more in June than it had in February. He no longer did the cutting. He did the alignment. He did the reading of the grain. He did the calling of the shots. Juno at 14 and now 15 held the piece steady. Nettie made the cuts. Between the 3 of them, the workshop had by June a 2-month wait list, and Estelle had been forced over Warren's furious objections to install an actual answering machine. Nettie looked out at Providence. The city had a summer light unlike any other city's light. Softer, bluer. It caught on the copper of the Superman building, and on the church spire on Angel Street, and on the flat metallic sheet of Narragansett Bay far to the east. She thought about her grandmother, about the last night. The way Eloan had, at 3:10 in the morning, taken Nettie's hand and said, "Honey, honey." That was all, just the word twice, which had been at this time disappointing to Nettie, because Nettie had been waiting for a sentence, in which Nettie now understood on this roof in this city in this June had been the sentence. "Honey, just look at you." The wind moved. Juno set down her sandpaper. "Nettie, yeah, I cried last night." Nettie turned her head. "About your parents, about my mother. I have not been able to cry about her. I have been able to cry about my father, but I have not been able to cry about her. Last night I was doing the fine grade on this footstool, and Warren left the room, and he did not know I was still awake, and I put my face in my hands and I cried about her." Nettie did not touch her. She waited. It felt better, Juno told her. She had not known it would feel better. She had thought it would feel worse. She had thought it would feel like breaking a bone. It had felt like setting one. Nettie's eyes did the thing. She did not wipe them. "Juno, yes, I am so proud of you. Because I cried. Because you sat down with a difficult thing until it was not." Juno was quiet for a moment. Then she said that was what Nettie's grandmother used to tell her, about the math homework. Nettie stared. "How did you know that?" "Miss Estelle told me." "Miss Estelle has been writing my grandmother, your grandmother, into every conversation for 4 months. I think she is teaching me your grandmother because she is not sure how many of you there are left." Nettie put her face against her knees. Because that was what she had. Because there is a certain kind of sentence a 14-year-old girl says on a roof in June, in a city her parents will never see her live in, that a person does not know how to hold with their face upright. Juno did not touch her either. She simply picked up the sandpaper again. 2 strokes, 3, 4. Then without looking, she reached over and put one small hand on the top of Nettie's head, briefly the way an aunt does, or the way a grandmother does. And then before it could become anything, she took her hand back. Nettie sat up. She wiped her face. She looked out at the city. She spoke aloud as if speaking to the whole of Providence, or maybe to somebody past Providence. If someone in your life ever handed you the piece nobody wanted, the leaking house, the difficult neighbor, the old man in the front room who never smiles in photographs, the 14-year-old girl hiding in a workshop nobody told you about. She paused. Look at it again, because sometimes love hides itself in the shape of a thing that needs work. Because grandmothers know what they are doing even when they cannot say it out loud. Because a widow's walk that has been nailed shut for 22 years will hold your weight the day you climb up to open it if you are patient with the hinges. Because the people who spent their lives fixing other people's roofs deserve to have their names spoken in a public room while they are still alive to hear it. Because a house is not a house. Because a person is not a possession. Because the family you are born into is not always the family you are for. She stopped. The wind moved. Then more quietly Warren Pretty, Eloan Fairchild, Juno Baxter, Nettie Fairchild, Estelle Pruitt, Thora Whitfield, Bettina Fairchild, Cressida Fairchild. They were all still alive on the 7th of June, which is in the private grammar of a woman who has just spent 15 months at a hospice bedside the sentence that matters most. Down on the sidewalk of Larkin Row, a delivery man walked past with a package. He looked up at the roof. He saw two women, one young, one younger, sitting on a small railed platform against a blue New England sky on a bench that had on its underside a sentence painted by a woman named Estelle Pruitt about a woman named Eloan Fairchild who had 22 years ago boarded up her own widow's walk and left a name on the door for a girl who had not yet been born. He waved. Nettie waved back. Juno, without looking up from her sanding, raised one hand very briefly. The delivery man went on. Somewhere below them in the front room of 1849, Warren Pretty tapped a walnut chair leg twice with a small wooden mallet, listening for the sound the wood makes when it is ready. On the workbench beside him, the third ledger book of the season was open to a fresh page. In his careful square handwriting, the top of the page said, June 7, Widow's Walk secured, bench installed, Nettie on roof with Juno, Eloan at rest. He set the mallet down. His right hand was steady for a moment, which happened sometimes now and then when a room was calm enough. He picked up the pen. He turned the page. He began in the same careful hand he had used since 2001 to write the next entry. The house in the way of all old houses kept breathing.